Welcome, all my fellow Washington brethren and sistren. I am your man and resident Washington football team fan, Luke. Thank you for joining me here on the Washington Football Report. We are back with our exclusive limited series with our positional rankings. We've done the quarterback position, running back position, wide receiver, and tight end positions. We are going to clean up the entire offense with our final position on the offensive side of the football, the offensive line. Now, this video is going to be very brief. There aren't a lot of intricacies to get into. It's not an easy, quick look at a few guys and move on like we've done with the various positions we've knocked down already. Offensive line is a lot more expansive. There are more players to consider. There are more moving parts. So I'm going to keep this as short and sweet as possible. We're going to go through where Washington ranks within the division, which I think is the most important thing. And then we'll talk about their overall rank. I won't go through all the teams in the league like I normally do, because again, it's very objective and subjective when it comes specifically to the offensive line. Now, again, every single one of these positions, it's very subjective, but specifically with the offensive line, because it's so hard to be able to gauge sometimes what the offensive line is doing, who's responsible for what. Was that the quarterback's fault? Was it a wide receiver who ran the wrong route? Is that why this guy gave up a sack, this, that, and the third? So essentially, I go through the eyeball test with all these positions, no different with the offensive line. I'm going to give you my opinion as to where this offensive line room ranks within the league and the NFC East. So let's get into that real quick. And I'm going to start by telling you that I have Washington ranked second in the division, and we'll go through the teams quickly, and I'll tell you where they rank in the division and why. So the Philadelphia Eagles bring up the rear on the offensive line. Now, I don't think their offensive line is as bad as people think. And honestly speaking, I don't think the Eagles roster is as bad as people project it to be. However, guys are going to have to step up if they're not going to be viewed in that same light as everyone is casting upon them, which is, hey, they stink, their roster isn't that good, and they're going to be the worst team in the NFC East. That will come to fruition if guys don't step up. It's the same way on the offensive line. They've got guys that may have talent, like Andre Dillard, who they are waiting on. He can't stay healthy. That's been his biggest problem. I like to assume health when we do these things. We still don't know what Andre Dillard is, frankly. So hard to really project what he's going to be at this level, because he really hasn't played all that much. They got old, it seemed like, similar to Dallas a little bit last year. Overnight on the offensive line, there were injuries, much like Dallas on the offensive line last year. Really, everybody in the division experienced injuries on the offensive line, but the Eagles and the Cowboys, I thought, were a little bit more ravaged by the injury bug on the offensive line than the other teams in the division. With that said, the Eagles had Jason Peters, who looked like he was done in Philadelphia and done really for his career, back in Philadelphia because they were so injury riddled on the offensive line. I think they've got some issues on the interior. If Brandon Brooks is healthy, again, he wasn't healthy last year. If he's healthy, he's one of the better guards in football. He's got to be healthy. I'm assuming health. Okay, Jason Kelce, Jason Kels, as we were notified that their last name isn't Kelce. We've been calling them Kelce their entire careers. Their last name is Kels. So Jason Kels, one of the better centers in football, but he's getting up there in age. What is he, 34, 35, 36 years old? He's somewhere in there. At some point, you assume a drop-off. I thought he was good last year. I didn't think he was great last season. So I think they've got some pieces if guys are healthy, and obviously Lane Johnson. So if they're healthy, I don't think they're the last team in this division. I'm going to assume health, but I don't love the depth of their room, and that's where they get hurt in this whole process. Is I think their frontline starters are damn good. It's when we start tapping into their depth and start looking at some of their guys, and they lost Big V, and he was a huge part of their depth. Every time one of their tackles would go down, say what you want about Big V, he'd step in and he would solidify things for them. I don't love Jordan Mailata. They've got a lot of guys that I don't know if I trust if injuries start to occur. That's why I think the Eagles right now bring up the rear. And honestly, I could see a situation where I've got the Eagles third and the Giants offensive line fourth. So stay tuned, because we could flip-flop and waffle. I went back and forth with those two teams as to who was third, who was fourth. But the Giants right now are at the third position for me on the offensive line in this division. Now, you could argue the Eagles, and you know what? I'm going to make the argument that the Eagles are better than them. So I'm going to flip-flop the two and say that the Giants are the worst offensive line in this division, and we're going to assume health with the Eagles, and they're third in this division. So the Giants going to bring up the rear. I'm going to flip-flop, and I just convinced myself that the Eagles are better than the Giants. The Giants have a ton of guys that I feel like can play at a high level in this league. However, again, much like I talked about with the Eagles, they've got to stay healthy, and they've got guys that I don't necessarily trust yet. They drafted a tackle in the first round out of Georgia last year, and he had his fair share of struggles to start off the season. They got rid of the offensive line coach. They got a little bit more intimate and hands-on with him. He started to play better as the season wore on. However, still really don't know what to expect out of him. They've got some other guys on that offensive line that are pretty damn good. I actually like Will Hernandez. I think that their center might be their best offensive lineman, and he proved it last year when he had to move to multiple positions because they had so many injuries. That said, I don't necessarily love what they have behind the guys that they have starting. They had to get rid of Kevin Zeitler because of cap reasons, and I think this offensive line may have some issues. They've got to protect Daniel Jones, or else everything goes to hell in a handbasket. I think they are the worst offensive line in this division until they prove otherwise. I don't love what the Giants put out in front of Daniel Jones, and so we'll see if they're able. Now, again, Nate Solder is back. He sat out due to COVID last year. He could be one of the missing links and pieces that really help fortify this offensive line. We'll see. I don't love what the Giants are putting out in front of Daniel Jones, but maybe it'll be better this year. We will see. So they're fourth. The Eagles are third. We're second. Now, to me, from guard to guard, we are locked in. And I told you, what sold me on us being the second best offensive line in the division is I don't think our frontline starters are better than Philadelphia's nor Dallas's, okay? What is better, though, and it's better than I think the entire division, is our collective depth. Now, I rate on a scale that rates a higher percentage of the weighted grade total is your starting lineup, your starting five, because those guys are going to see the bulk of the snaps. If they stay healthy, they'll see all of the snaps. That's what you're hoping for. So you don't hope that you have to tap into your depth, which is why your starting guys mean more to me. However, our starters aren't that far off from the rest of the division starters, which is why I still have us ahead of the Eagles. But the rest of our depth, if something were to happen to our guard, one of our guards, or even one of our tackles, I feel like we've got guys that can step in and give us some quality snaps. And then you throw in some of these young guys. Again, I don't like to, throw in the young guys in the discussion when we're talking about these specific positions because we just don't know how these guys are going to perform. But when you throw in a guy like Samuel Cosme, you feel really good knowing, hey, got another young guy here that may be able to step in and give us something in case of an emergency. So I just like the depth Washington has, much like the Philadelphia Eagles, if I'm not mistaken. Not the Eagles. I'm thinking of another team. I think I'm thinking of the Green Bay Packers, I believe. One of those teams in the league are going to have 3 different offensive linemen starters on their offensive line. Washington's going to have that going into the 2021 season, where 3 guys that did not start week 1 for them are going to be starting at both tackle positions and at left guard. Okay, so there are going to be significant changes on the offensive line, but when you look at the depth of that offensive line, I just feel like we have enough guys that'll be adequate enough plugged into the starting lineup, and if they're in a backup role and they're pressed into action, they step in and there's not a significant drop off. And it doesn't. The only position I'm somewhat nervous about if we were to incur an injury would be center, because we really don't have a guy that has proven himself in this league to be a quality backup center. Now, Wes Schweitzer is capable. He's done it in this league before, but he's a guard. He's more of a guard. He proved that last season, but he can play center in a pinch. We've got guys that we like, including Keith Ishmael, who we drafted to be a backup center, but I don't anticipate him necessarily making this football team with all the depth that we have at other positions. We will see what happens there, but at the end of the day, they're going to Charles Leno Jr. coming on board, along with Cornelius Lucas, and of course, the aforementioned Samuel Cosmi gives you a really good 2 out of 3 punch where you say, take 2 out of those 3 guys, insert them into the starting lineup. You feel good about what you have at the tackle position. So we know from guard to guard, we're the only team with an all-pro player on the offensive line in the division, okay? We've got an all-pro guard in Brandon Sheriff. We've got a center that is one of the more reliable and dependable centers in the division. I think Kelsey may be, or Kels may be better than him. But at this point of his career, I'll take our guy over a 35-year-old Jason Kels. So I love Chase Roullier and what he brings, the dependability, the stability that he brings to the interior of our offensive line. And then finally, look, we got about 3 or 4 dudes that can play left guard. And we don't know what we'll get out of Sadiq Charles if he were pressed into action or plugged into left guard. We don't know what Eric Flowers would look like at left guard in this system. We know what he looked like with Bill Callahan here. Well, Callahan's no longer here, so we can't be assured that he'll fit in hand in glove like he did when he was here the first time. But feels good to have a guy like that on the bench if need be. Wes Schweitzer showed us, hey, I can start and be very formidable for you last year. So left guard for me isn't an issue because we've got 3 or 4 guys that I think we can plug in there and get quality play from no matter what the circumstances are. And then you go to the tackle positions, as I already mentioned. You got 3 guys for 2 spots. Feel good about all 3 of those guys. So we'll see what happens, like us, because of our depth as the number 2 offensive line group in the NFC East. And then lastly, the Dallas Cowboys come in first in the division. The Cowboys, to me, when they're healthy, and this is the same thing we said about the Eagles, is that they have guys that are among the best of their positional groups when they're healthy. Last year, they weren't healthy. Now, Tyron Smith is really, I think, on his last legs because he's just had so many injuries now that I can't even keep count. But if he's healthy, he's one of the better left tackles. Now, I don't think he's one of the best left tackles anymore in the game, but you can get by with Tyron Smith at left tackle if he's healthy. You look at their other tackle position, and La'el Collins, he wasn't healthy last year. When he's healthy, he's really good as a right tackle. Hell, he's really good as a guard, as we've seen already in this league as well. So you like your bookends there. You go inside, and I think their best offensive lineman may be Zach Martin. And honestly speaking, I'm not sure he's not the best guard in the entire division. You know, we got a guy that's all pro, but Zach Martin showed the ability to even kick outside and play tackle in a pinch last year when the Cowboys were hurting. And you could argue that his ability to go outside and play tackle coincided with the Cowboys' ability to win some games down the stretch of the season to even give them a chance to be in the NFC East discussion late in the season. It was Zach Martin's ability to kick outside from guard to tackle and be not just serviceable, but damn good that gave them a chance for a brief stretch there. So I think that Zach Martin may be the best offensive lineman they have and maybe the best offensive guard in the division. That said, he was one of their rocks last year for much of the season until he got a little banged up down the stretch. And then they've got a solid center in Tyler Badaze. We'll see what he does. Obviously, he's not what they had at the center position with the Wisconsin center that had to retire because of the syndrome that he contracted. But I think Tyler Biadasz might be okay for them, or Badaze, excuse me, may be fine for them. We'll see what happens. At the end of the day, I just gave you 4 guys out of 5 on their offensive line, not to mention Connor Williams, who I'm not necessarily in love with, but I think he's gotten better as their left guard. They've got stuff. And then they've got stuff behind the stuff, like Connor McGovern, who I wanted Washington to take a couple of years ago in the draft. They've got guys that got experience last year because they had to play and were pressed into action. That only makes that group stronger. I like their frontline guys. I think they have adequate depth. It's not great depth, but it's good enough to keep them ahead of the rest of the pack. So I've got the Cowboys, assuming health, and that's what I'm doing. as the #1 offensive line in the division. I've got Washington #2 because they've got enough frontline starters and the most depth of any team in the division, which carries the day for them. The Eagles, if they had more depth, would probably surpass Washington's offensive line and be the second offensive line in this division. But it's the lack of depth that scares me. They have 1 or 2 injuries. They could really be in some serious trouble up front along that offensive line, and that's the problem for the Eagles, which is why they come in at #3. And then the Giants, I just think they have a lack of talent. I don't think they have as much talent as the other teams in the division along the offensive line. They may actually have a little bit more depth than Philadelphia. I just don't love their talent. I don't think their frontline starters, their guys that they're going to project as their starters week 1, are as talented as Philadelphia, Dallas's, or Washington's. And that pretty much is the reason they are dead last in the division along the offensive line. So that is my NFC East rankings for the offensive line. Just to give you a quick little synopsis, Washington ranks 14th in the NFL in terms of offensive line rooms. I think that they've got a chance to be right there. I don't see them penetrating the top 10 until they solidify their tackle position. Really, they need to solidify the entire offensive line. You know, Sheriff is probably playing his final season in Washington this year. More likely than not. I can't say that that's a guarantee, but more likely than not, he's playing his final season in Washington. So you're going to have a hole at right guard. We still don't know what they're going to do at left guard, because I really think they want Sadiq Charles to play, and I think he's going to get an opportunity to be the starting left guard this upcoming season in training camp and into the preseason. If he stays healthy, I think he's going to have a great shot at winning that job. Also, left tackle, right tackle. They've got to solidify those 2 positions. Do they really love Cornelius Lucas? If so, he's going to get an opportunity to start. They signed Charles Leno Jr. on a 1-year deal, but they drafted they drafted Samuel Cosmi to be a starting offensive tackle now. Whether it's right or left, it remains to be seen, but they drafted Samuel Cosmi to be a starting tackle for this Washington football team moving forward. So it is interesting to see what they decide to do with Samuel Cosmi. I don't think he's going to start the season off as one of the starting 5, but I think as we get into the season, week 6, week 7, somewhere in there, you're going to see Samuel Cosmi on the field and being the starter at either left or right tackle moving forward for the remainder of the season, and more likely than not into the future and beyond. So that's how I view this Washington football team's offensive line. 14th in the league, 2nd in the NFC East behind the Dallas Cowboys offensive line. And I think this is a group that is going to have to be big if Washington is going to have a strong 2021 campaign. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. If the offensive line isn't any good, the run game isn't any good, it's going to be hard for Ryan Fitzpatrick and this offense to flourish. They've got to take care of business. I think we've got enough depth to do exactly that. I am a Washington fan, etched in burgundy and gold. My Washington spirit will never die. Washington spirit will never fold. Until we meet again, hail to our beloved Washington football team. We will now change gears and switch it to the defensive side of the football, where we'd like to think that our rankings will be a lot higher, especially on the defensive line. We'll see when we get there. Until then, you guys have a good one.